Endurance Junkie Podcast, episode 46. Hey Junkie, Happy New Year, and welcome to another episode of the Endurance Junkie Podcast, the show where I will be interviewing some of the fastest, smartest, and most inspiring people active in the endurance world today. Joining me now is Frank Day, and Frank is one of the original 1978 Hawaii Ironman finishers, and he's also the inventor of PowerCranks, one of the most effective ways to improve your cycling efficiency, with dividends paid off in the form of faster cycling and even faster running times. Frank, thanks for taking the time to chat here today. Now, for those of us who don't know you, can you tell us a bit about yourself and your sporting background, and how you ended up as one of 15 people to toe the start line of that first ever Hawaii Ironman in 1978?
Oh, sure. My name's Frank Day, and I am an original Ironman, and how I got there is sort of a long and interesting. I don't know, it's interesting to me, but I was in Hawaii, and I went to medical school in Hawaii first, and I had never been an endurance athlete. I had rode crew in college, which is sort of an endurance sport, but after that, after I got to college, my sports involved playing squash and handball and flag football and, just ordinary things that people do to see, and of course living in Hawaii, I was living in Hawaii a lot, and we went, body surfing and stuff like that, but I never really got involved in any endurance athletes. But when I was in medical school in my fourth year, my first rotation fourth year was a cardiology rotation, and my mentors there was Jack Scaff, and he ran the Honolulu Marathon Clinic, and they did the cardiac rehab program. And so part of our 6 weeks in cardiology is we had to participate in the cardiac rehab program and the Honolulu Marathon Clinic so we could understand how they taught sedentary people how to run and complete a marathon. And so this was like in June, and the Honolulu Marathon was in December. And so I did that 6 weeks. I ran around the gym with the cardiac rehab people, and we showed up at Kapiolani Park on Sundays for the Honolulu Marathon Clinic. And at the end of that 6 weeks, I was running 6 to 10 miles, and I determined that, I'm going to try and do the marathon. So I kept running, and I did that first marathon. I did it just under 4 hours, and I felt really cool, but I really enjoyed it, and I thought it was really great, so I kept running. When I went to my internship, I looked for a house that was a good jogging distance away from the hospital, and I found one about 3 miles away, so it wasn't too far, but it allowed me to continue to get my miles in, and I continued to run, so I kept running during my internship, and then after my internship, the Navy shipped me back to Hawaii, and I was assigned to some destroyers that were in the shipyard, and so I was basically land-based, and I just kept. I was able to run, but my house was about 10 miles away from the thing. I thought that was too far for me to run, so I bought a bike so I could commute by bike, and then I ran at lunch, and so I was getting more and more into running and distance running, but I also had some bike experience, and I was trying to qualify for Boston, and at that time I had to do a sub 3 hour time to qualify for Boston, and I trained hard. I joined a gym. I did all sorts of stuff. I went to and I had signed up to do the Big Island Marathon, and There I was sighted this woman who was she was a 3-hour marathoner, pretty sure. And I says, well, I'll just let her pace me. The problem with that race is we were standing about 5 minutes before the start of the race. One of these typical Hawaiian rainstorms came in, and it just poured like nobody's business. And then the gun went off, and the sun came out, and the steam came off of the roadways, and it was like running in a sauna. And I just failed big time, and did like a 3:45, and it was and I was really feeling down. And then one of my friends a couple weeks later says, well, why don't we go do Run to the Sun? And I thought about it. I thought, well, that'll make something. And Run to the Sun is over on Maui, and it's from the airport to the top of Mount Haleakala. So it's a 37-mile run, and every step is uphill. And so I went over there, and I found somebody who would go over and act as my one of the people who worked in my office. He and his wife came over and helped me out, followed in the car and gave me fluids and stuff. You had to provide your own support in that run. And I did it, okay? And so that was my first ultra. And then after that, I did, I think, a 50K or a 50-mile, but I'd done a couple ultras. And marathons used to kill me. You know, I'd run a marathon, and I couldn't walk for 2 or 3 days straight. And after these ultras, I was pretty good. And what I learned was there's a big difference between racing and doing, okay? So
it's just about a question of pacing yourself, right?
It's all about pacing. And so I'm riding my bike, back from work one day, and I'm listening to the radio, and I'm at the stoplight, and at the end of the news, this guy gives this little throwaway guy. He says, listen to this. Some crazy guy's going to do this race where they're going to do the Waikiki rough water swim, the Round Oahu bicycle ride, and the Honolulu Marathon, one after the other. Any of you guys crazy want to do this, call this number. And I sort of laughed at it. But then as I was riding home, I got thinking about it. I says, well, here I am riding my bike, and I've done the ultras and whatever, and I'm a pretty safe swimmer. I wonder. So I got home, I called the radio station, said, what's that number? And they said, here's the number. So I called it, and it was John Collins. Turns out he worked in the building right next to me in the shipyard. He said, come on over and talk about it. So I went over there, and he says, you're in as good a shape as any of us. None of us even know if it can be done. Why don't you just give it a try? So I went and went over the O Club pool and swam a mile, convinced myself I wasn't going to drown, and said, okay. So I found some people. We had to have somebody go on a surfboard with us on the swim, so we had to find somebody to do that. We had to provide our own support on both the bike and the run and all this stuff. But I found people who were willing to do that for me, so I signed up. This was about 2 weeks before the race. All right, so I did no specific training whatsoever. Now, some people knew this was going on for a long time, but I didn't. I just heard about it 2 weeks before. But I knew the key: you can do anything if you go slow enough, So that was, I was going to make sure I stayed within myself and what I did. So I did the swim. I basically breaststroked the whole swim. And that first day, the water was like a bathtub. You couldn't have had any better water. I mean, it was just, there wasn't a ripple to be seen anywhere. So, I did the swim. I can't remember what my time was, about an hour and 20 minutes or so. It was, I was one of the slower guys, but I got out of the water, took a shower, on the beach, hopped on my bike, and my plan was to stop every 6 miles and assess myself. I had done some reading as to what the guys in the Tour de France ate, for nutrition. I said, well, oranges and bananas. So we had oranges and bananas, So I, and I'd stop and I'd assess stuff and whatever. And I did the bike, came in off of the bike, and I was of course I did the bike. We had, the bikes were nothing. They were just ordinary touring bike. 10 speeds was all we had, and no aero bars, no nothing. But I got off the bike. In fact, I did the bike in cages in my running shoes, got off the bike and started the run. I couldn't believe it. I was running off at my training pace and felt great, and we were just going along, and then about 10 miles, I just ran out of energy. I had nothing left, and it just was, the tank was empty. And so we went about that spot on the course, there was a McDonald's, and we went inside and I sat down, and I had a great big Coke. And we got back out, and I ran the Hawaii Kai Loop, which is about 4 miles. And at the end of that 4 miles, I ran out of energy again. And then basically I walked in. But I finished. I probably did a little bit of jogging, but I just couldn't. I just had nothing left for running. But I was able to finish in about 16:30 and change. And I was the last finisher under the current 17-hour mark. John Collins finished at just over 17 hours, but I was 8th. And so that was the story. When I was got on the bike, one of the funny things I remember is I got on the bike, I passed Henry Forest at about, maybe 20 or 30 miles into the bike when we were out by one of the eastern shore out there. The bike ride was around the island, just the road around the island. And I passed him, and as I passed him, he asked me, he says, "How do you shift this thing?" Okay. And I thought he was toast. He was struggling along. Well, he was the little engine that could. I found out later that as I was talking to him, what he meant by that question is, how do you make it easier? Well, of course, the way you make it easier is you train, which
that's one way to do it. Yeah.
Yeah, because he was one of the people who had, I think he had borrowed a bike for he had no biking experience. We were all basically runners and swimmers who did the thing. Most of us were runners. There were a couple of swimmers in it, but most of us were runners. There were a lot of people who ran on the island then, but nobody biked. It turns out the Around Oahu bicycle race wasn't a race at all. It was a Round Oahu bicycle ride, and it lasted 2 days, and none of us knew that. So we did their Round Oahu bicycle ride in 1 day and turned it into a race. But that was how it. That's how I got involved in it. And then the next day or 2 days later, we all went over to John Collins' house, and he had a silk screen made up, and we brought in our own T-shirts, and we silk screened our finishers T-shirts. Everybody could silk screen the shirt, and then if you finished it, which 15 people started and 12 finished, if you finished it, you could put finisher on the shirt too, and then do that stuff. And the other interesting thing about the thing is our entry fee, okay, was $5.
Wow.
Okay, and we got $2 back.
You got $2 back. That's awesome.
So,
the finishing chute must have been amazing for that price.
Yeah. Well, the finishing chute when I got there, we kept our own time. Okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, before I was there, it was dark. And when I got there, I mean, everybody who did the race knew the course. Okay. And we had all done the marathon. We knew where the finishing line was. And so we got there. There was nobody there. And we just looked at the watch and said, okay, this is the time, whatever. But the early guys, Judy Collins was keeping track of the times for sort of officially there. But then when it got to be really late, she just left and left it up to us to keep her own time. But because I think one of the guys took close to 24 hours or so. So, I mean, it was, I mean, there is a reason they have a cutoff so people can go home, you know. So, but it's I mean, you can have pretty small entry fees if, one, you make the people provide their own support, two, don't close any roads, because we had to follow the traffic. You know, we had to stop at stoplights and do stuff like that. So you know, none of the roads were closed and stuff like that. So yeah, if you are just sort of out for a training ride, yeah, it doesn't cost a lot of money to put on something like that. But if you're going to provide support and close roads and stuff like that, well, then it starts to get expensive.
Yeah, it sure does.
You know?
Now you raced again in '79.
I did.
Did you train for that '79 event? Did you take out your bike and do these long rides? And
I did. I started doing some long rides, and I also did some swimming. Okay, because I knew I went back with the expectation that I could do a sub 12.
Okay.
And the winner the year before was had done, you know, like 11:45. So I thought that I was have the chance to go back and compete to win. And you know, and if somebody went out too hard, you know, you never know. But I went back with the expectation that I was going to race it this year and be, you know, what I looked at when I, on my bike ride, I was stopped for over an hour, you know, on my little thing, you know, pacing myself. Well, stopping really hurts your average speed.
It does, yeah.
So my intent was to say, well, look, all you need to do is slow down at these aid stations. You can do, but you don't need to necessarily stop. You know, if you can get, you know, half a mile or quarter mile down the road when you're doing this sort of assessing thing and stuff like that, man, I mean, you probably take 2 hours off your time, you know. So that was, you know, I was a lot smarter, you know, in the sense, okay, now I sort of understood the distance a bit and had a, you know, a sense of how to better pace myself for a better time. What got me though on the second in '79 is there was a huge storm in the area, and we went. There were like 6-foot waves. It was just awful. There was we took a vote on the Saturday. The race had been on a Saturday. We took a vote on the Saturday, and everybody voted to postpone it till Sunday because hoping that the weather would clear up, even though the forecast wasn't, and it didn't. And but we started, and there were 60 people showed up at the finish line. The weather was so bad, only 15 got in the water. I was one of them. Gordon Haller, who won the race the year before, probably lost it because his surfboard guy got blown out to sea and had to be rescued. And so Gordon was swimming blind and couldn't see where he was going because the surf was so high. And it took him, which really hurt his swim time. That probably cost him the race. But and then I got on the bike. Well, it was raining and whatever. Well, you couldn't see potholes. Well, I ended up hitting all these potholes and ended up with all these flats. I didn't know how to change a tire. I didn't know how all this stuff. So it was just crazy. And then when I got out of the run, my knee started bothering me, and I think I had strained my knee trying to do my breaststroke so hard to stay warm because the water temperature was cold because of all the rain there had been. And I strained my knee, and all my support crew had to work the next day. And so I just sort of said that I was probably going to have about the same time as last year. And so I ended up saying, you guys have to go to work. I've been here, done that. So I DNF'd, about halfway in the run just so my crew could go home and go to work the next day. So but anyhow, that was my experience in 78, but it was quite a bit different experience.
You didn't enroll for the 1980 event? You didn't feel like you had any unfinished business?
See, I was on the mainland then, and it was much harder to get back for the I came back for 79, but I had people on the island and I get a bike and stuff, but I was I was on the mainland, and it was just, it was, and I was busy, and I can't remember, but it just, it wasn't that big a deal to me. I mean, I wasn't a pro, they didn't have pros back then. I mean, I'd done it, and I was still running, but I was most of what I was doing was marathons still. I was still primarily a runner,
Yeah, and I guess that the event just didn't have the allure that it has today. It was just something obscure there on a small little island in the middle of the Pacific, and you'd done that, and so you wanted to maybe...
Well, let me say, that second year I did get my picture in People magazine, but that was because they were highlighting Lynn Lemaire, and I happened to be standing on the beach next to her, And I did make the Sports Illustrated article. The guy interviewed me, and I had a little quote. I got mentioned in the Sports Illustrated article, but something about that took it off. I think the next year there were like 300 people there, and what's so strange about this? There's something about triathlon, but what's so strange about this? I was an ultra marathoner. Well, you go to a marathon, there'd be 10 or 15,000 people there. You go to a 50K, which is 6 miles longer, and there'd be 50 people. Mm-hmm. I mean, back then, marathon was the longest thing that the average person could, did. Ultras were for crazy people, Well, Ironman, that's sort of the crazy people's ultra, And you'd have thought this thing is going to be like ultras, there'll be 50 people show up. Well, that's not what it turned out, and it's sort of hard to sit there and say, what is it about? You go to ultra running events today, they're just like they used to be, There'll be 50 people there, But Ironman, it took off, and so for some, I don't know what it is about it, but it's certainly the longest thing that the average person aspires to do today. Mm-hmm. It's supplanted marathon in that way.
Yeah, I think there's a shift again now. I mean, a lot of people have been doing Ironman and have been doing multiple of them, and maybe they're looking for a different challenge now, and maybe that's why ultra running and trail running is booming so much right now, because it lasts longer, and that's what people are looking for now.
Well, I don't know, but anyhow, you would have never, no one in their right mind would have ever predicted that Ironman would be what it is today.
No, I can imagine.
From what went on, so. But anyhow, it is, and it's a lot of fun, and and doing it is something that you like. as John said very early on, he says, 2.4-mile swim, 112-mile bike, 26-mile run, and brag for the rest of your life.
Yeah. We all do.
So,
we all have to do that.
Yep.
All right. Let's talk PowerCranks. Because 1978,
Sure.
I mean, it's amazing to hear those stories, and
Right.
I think what the originals have to say, it's quite amazing. But one of the main reasons that I wanted to bring you on is because, you somehow stayed involved in triathlon. I think you continued racing shorter distances when you were back on the mainland. But
Right.
You also invented something that's called PowerCranks.
That's correct.
Can you tell us a bit about what it is exactly and how you came about developing the product?
Yeah, well, PowerCranks are independent bicycle cranks, okay? So if you push the left one, the right one just sits there. And so in order to ride the bike, you have to be attached to the pedals and you have to pull the pedal up on the backstroke, okay? I came about the idea because there was an article back in Scientific American many years ago about the bicycle land speed record, and they were talking about it's all aerodynamics, and so I had been thinking about design, how I would design a bike with a smaller frontal area than what they had done there and do this stuff. So I had this idea for a bike design, and my bike design involved the rider being prone and straddling the drive wheel. Well, that required me to have an independent left and right drive, and I wasn't sure exactly how to do that. And I had rode crew in college, and I knew that you could generate a lot of power with a back and forth crew type, motion. And so I had this idea for one-way clutches, straddling the wheel in the back and whatever. But I didn't want to build a thing that wasn't going to work, that was going to cost a lot of money and stuff like this. So I said, well, let me test this out on a regular bike. Let me see if I can modify some regular cranks and just see how strong does the clutch have to be. Can I do something like this? Can I do this stuff? So I took my bike. I went and found some one-way clutches available, and I took my bike and I found a machine shop that would work with me, and where we did this stuff, and I put them on my bike, and I was going to do this. I was trying to do this pedaling back and forth, and God, that was awful. I mean, you couldn't. It was just awful. But as I was doing this, I started riding around, ordinarily, like a regular bike with them, and the light bulb went on, and I thought, you know what? This might be a pretty good training device to teach people how to pedal the whole stroke. Let me see what's going on. So the first one I did was pretty small clutch, and it wasn't big enough. I went and found a bigger clutch, and we made a different set of cranks, and I put them on my bike, and I started riding around, and in 2 to 3 months, I was riding 2 to 3 miles an hour faster than I'd ever ridden before. I went, holy cow, this is amazing. So I said, well, I wonder if I can get a patent on this thing, because I wasn't going to do anything if I couldn't get a patent, because, the big guys would have just killed me. So as soon as the idea was out there. So I did a search, and sure enough, I could get a patent on it. So I said, well, let me push this a bit. So we made a few. And I went down to the local bicycle. They had a swap meet, and I put a table there, and I tried to recruit some people to train with the cranks, so I would have a sense of what could I tell people these would do for them. I need to have a sense. So I got about 10 people. Well, as I found out that power cranks are hard in the beginning, and not all the people stayed with them, but we had 3 people, okay, who basically went 6 months. And what I did is I brought them in every month and put them on a CompuTrainer, and I did a ramp test to their max power, okay? And in about 6 to 9 months, what I was finding, and the people who stayed with the program, we saw about a 40% increase in power. Oh no. And that's the number I've used. Now, people have thought that's impossible. But if it turns out that 40% is about, translate, if you don't change any aerodynamics or anything else, translates to, for most people, about a 2 to 3 mile an hour speed improvement. That's what I saw. That's what a lot of our customers report. Now, we've had people report 5 mile an hour improvements, and we've had people report small improvements. But on average, we see really, really big speed improvements when people transform the way they pedal the bike. And as I've thought about this, you sit there and you say, well, why can't people learn this? I mean, what's so difficult about learning this technique? Well, the problem is on regular cranks, okay? The problem is how we all learned how to ride the bicycle. We all learned on platform pedals without being clipped in. And so to ride that bike, you have to learn to keep some negative pressure on the upstroke, or your foot's going to come off the pedal. So you have to be attached, you have to be in contact with the pedal when you're coming over the top to be able to start the downstroke quickly and powerfully. You know, if you're off the pedal, you're going to be looking for it. So it's how we learned to pedal in our formative years, and that became the unconscious coordination, okay, that we use. It's like we walk in a certain fashion because that's how we learned how to walk, and we don't think about it. We don't think about pedaling the bike, all right? And so how do you change that, okay, 10, 15, 20, 30 years later, when you say, well, I want to start pedaling in circles, you go out and buy clipless pedals. Well, just buying clipless pedals doesn't make you pull up on the backstroke. Something has to change that unconscious coordination to do it. And that's what PowerCranks do, because the pedal won't come up unless you completely unweight. And so we're giving people feedback when they don't completely unweight, when they don't do the whole circle because the crank doesn't work. And as they develop the unconscious ability to do that, unconscious, there's two things. Then there's two things that have to happen. First, you have to develop where this is your natural way of pedaling, but you also have to develop the endurance and the muscles so that you can do it for 5 hours. All right. So you can maybe think about it, okay, but unless you're thinking about it for 5 hours, you're going to get lazy and stop thinking about it and go back to your old way. So by the cranks doing the thinking for the rider, okay, we're doing two things. We're changing the unconscious coordination, and we're allowing them to get enough repetitions in that they can develop the endurance. So to do this, and as I like to tell people, I said, say if you're doing an Ironman and you've got a 6-hour bike ride ahead of you, or a 5-hour or a 4-hour bike ride, the most important hour is not the first hour, it's the last hour. And so you've got to, if you want to see good bike speed improvement, you have to train yourself to pedal that last hour as well as you pedal the first hour. And that requires doing your long rides. You've got to put a lot of effort into the PowerCranks to develop that. Now, if you just do your normal training, all your training on them, that occurs naturally, and most people are starting to see bike speed improvements in 3 months. It's really good in 6 months. It probably continues for maybe 2 years, okay? And everybody's different. The weak bike riders are going to see more improvement than somebody who's already very good, you know? But somebody's already very good, a little bit of improvement is a big deal.
It can definitely make a big change.
All right. Know?
I'm going to have to stop you there, Frank, because I think the best thing we do here is maybe turn this into a two-way or two-parts interview, because I sort of want to stick to the half-hour mark here. So, yeah, I think we can call it quits for today, and then we'll continue on Wednesday, and let's get into a bit more detail and see how, talk about maybe how people can make the transition from normal cranks to power cranks. And
also we want to talk some about how they help the running, and also I want to talk some about crank length, the importance of crank length that we've found out. We've learned a lot over the years as we've studied this stuff, so we can talk. There's a lot more to talk about.
All right, cool.
Everybody should come back on Wednesday.
Let's do that. All right, thanks for your time, Frank, and we'll talk again on Wednesday.
Okay, goodbye, Peter.
Bye.